Good morning and welcome back to this World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Sania Strzemska. In a surprising turn of events, rocket debris from a SpaceX rocket has fallen on Polish soil. The rocket fragments were discovered outside Poznań in the west of the country. No damage was reported from the crash, but the incident raises many questions, including those about safety. And I have Dr. Piotr Witek from the Copernicus Science Center Planetarium joining me here this morning to explain what happened. Good morning, sir. Delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
Good morning. Hello.
So let's start with explaining what actually took place, right? So we have Falcon 9, then debris falling on Polish soil. Does it happen often? Is it a common occurrence? Why now? If you can sort of paint us a picture.
Well, it is an accident that shouldn't happen. Falcon 9 launches are quite frequent nowadays. Every few days, new rocket launches to put new Starlink satellites into the orbit. And this rocket is partially reusable. So the rocket consists of two stages. The lower stage lands back on the Earth and is recovered. The upper stage is left in the orbit, but it should the orbit so come back to Earth very soon after releasing the satellites. This time it didn't happen. The launch that we are talking about took place on February the 1st, and the rocket was expected to re-enter somewhere over the ocean on the next day. It didn't. Something failed in the re-entry mechanism, so the rocket was left uncontrolled orbiting the Earth. There was nothing stopping it from orbiting, but still it was low enough so that the Earth's atmosphere was slowing it down. And as it slowed down, it moved closer to the surface, and it had to had to fall through the atmosphere at some point. The orbital speed of satellites and also rocket bodies that send them there is high enough so that the majority of space debris just burns in the atmosphere. This time it didn't happen. The rocket part was big enough so that parts survived this re-entry despite this fiery fireball that we saw over Germany and Poland, and possibly even into. Possibly some debris even fall into the Ukrainian territory after coming across our country. It is still to be found.
Right.
But several pieces were found on Polish soil because they simply survived this re-entry.
Right, but this is potentially dangerous, right? I mean, for people. So Shouldn't there be some safety measures in place just in case something like this happens? As you've mentioned, the Falcon 9 launches are quite sort of common, right? So it could happen more often. Potentially.
Yes, but it definitely shouldn't. It is something that in different times should warrant an investigation by FAA. I don't know will it happen nowadays. Now the Elon Musk is so important figure close to the government. Still, the matter of safety is important for the majority of players, and there are many mechanisms to help the orbit spent rocket bodies and other debris from the orbit, and this time it was there, but it simply didn't work as intended. It is necessary that the company, the SpaceX, investigate why it failed and how to prevent it failing the next time. Still, the American side, the SpaceX company is more concerned with safety than several other players that are sending their rockets into space. A few years ago, China built their own space station, and they used even larger rockets from the Long March family. Somehow they didn't worry what happens to the rocket after it placed the part of space station on the orbit. So really large pieces of those rockets fall on the ground, including some African villages. Fortunately, up to now, no one ever was killed by falling space debris, but it can happen with intensifying movement in more and more rockets launching satellites into our orbits.
Right, and I have a case here from the International Space Station, right, that there was a space debris that crashed into a house, a Florida house, and that the family is seeking $80,000 in compensation from NASA. But my question to you would be, what is the volume of these rocket launches? Because you've mentioned it's more common now, so what kind of numbers are we looking at?
Nowadays, there are over 11,000 satellites orbiting the Earth. Most of them are Starlink satellites. Starlink satellites launched by SpaceX are launched in packages of few dozen. It changes with depending on the exact rocket configuration and different payload that is also sent with them. So these rocket bodies are quite regularly coming back to Earth, and no one is injured. Nothing is destroyed during this normal mode of operation. Still, there are debris. There is a debris orbiting Earth from earlier launches, and it's quite problematic to tell where exactly will it fall. There are many thousands of spent satellites and satellite fragments orbiting the Earth, and they are expected to re-enter at some point the atmosphere. Most of them will burn. The largest of them, which are those that are most dangerous, are closely tracked, and we should have predictions beforehand. Sometimes something fails in the chain of information. For example, the information about the expected re-entry falls into wrong email address.
Right. This was the case in Poland, I'm afraid. At least that's what the Ministry of Defense is saying. But I wanted to ask you, it doesn't only happen on Earth, right? I mean, the space debris can still damage things while in space, right? I'm talking about some satellites, if one of them is destroyed. If you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about this.
Yes, it's a real problem. Each year, the International Space Station has to make evasive maneuvers to avoid colliding with known space debris orbiting in the same or very similar orbits. So it is a real problem. And while the International Space Station and Chinese Space Station Tiangong are the only manned satellites in orbit, other satellites can be destroyed. There are no mechanisms to avoid such impact. Even worse, there are some countries that are still experimenting with anti-satellite weapon. So they intentionally destroy satellites, creating clouds of debris that are just spreading in the orbit and endangering many other satellites.
And these countries are Russia, perhaps?
Russia, sure. China, yeah.
Okay. And aren't there any sort of regulations to sort of try and protect what's out there?
Yes, there are some regulations, but times are changing, and regulations are often from a different period of time. For example, if we talk about the damage on Earth, there is an international law from 1972 that guarantees that the country who launched the spacecraft that fall on some other territory is responsible for that piece. It doesn't concern the situation when it's private company sending those satellites, so it's unfit for today.
Right, so this is, I actually was going to follow up and ask you about this, but I mean, SpaceX also works closely with NASA, so perhaps, I mean, there could be a way to hold the US responsible for that. I don't know. I mean, are there any sort of precedents in the, I mean, is this situation, you know, sort of unique, or has something like this happened before? And what sort of, you know, what follow-up?
Well, there were several accidents concerning large satellites falling into Earth. The largest of them, uncontrolled and impacting some territory. The largest of them was Skylab Station, American Skylab Station, but it was very, very long ago in 1979, if I recall correctly. The pieces of that space station fall on Australia, killing one cow and damaging some property. It was really scary for the people, and it prompted some international regulations. But as I said, they are quite dated now.
Right,
The
absolutely.
largest satellites, such as the Mir space stations, have experienced controlled re-entry. So if it is still possible to control that piece of debris that is coming back to Earth, it can be directed somewhere into ocean. And this is the regular way of disposing spent satellites.
Right. Just one last question. I was wondering, you know, what is the trajectory that, you know, these rockets take? I mean, how do they fly? Are there sort of, you know, are there certain corridors, or is it pretty random? They can be, you know, found all over. How does it work? Just briefly, if you can.
Okay, the satellites are orbiting the Earth, so they are coming around the planet. The planet rotates. So the track on the ground below the satellite moves on the surface as the planet rotates below the orbiting satellite. Where it is seen, where it can be seen, where it can fall, depends on the inclination of the orbit. So the plane that the satellite is orbiting versus the
So it's pretty random. I mean, it can, right?
no, it's very much predictable, but the exact place where the re-entry can happen is not so predictable, because the moment of re-entry depends on several factors: the aerodynamic properties of the satellite, the state of the atmosphere, and so on and so on.
Right, right. Because I believe, you know, that we were all taken by surprise by what happened. So I was wondering how does
No. It was tracked, so you can plot the line on Earth where it can impact, but you can't say where exactly on this path it will impact.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Piotr Witek, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you
for your insight. Much appreciated. And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World. News Bulletin coming right up.